Welcome back, everyone, to the Authentic as Fuck podcast. My name is Sun. I'm a storyteller and I teach storytelling. In this podcast, I interview with entrepreneurs and creators to kind of hear their story and try to see how the stories of their life led them to what they do and how they do it. Today we have Stephen Pressfield. I'm a huge fan of him. Welcome, Stephen. Thank you for
Thanks, Son. Thanks for having me.
us.
I'm a huge fan of you too. I'm really looking forward to this conversation.
Before we start, I wanted to just thank you for the book you sent me. It was actually like a whole gift box, the Daily Pressfield. I would advise, if you're like a writer or any kind of creative, I would definitely advise you to check out this book because it's super interesting how you put it into like 365 days. And I'm not a reader, to be honest. Like I actually don't like other than 3 of your books and a handful of books, like I don't really read, but like the way you made this break into like each daily, and it's like so short and easy to do. Like I loved how you.
Thanks.
How does an idea like that come up for you?
That's a great
how
question.
Do you start
Actually, the idea came from Ryan Holiday, whose book The Daily Stoic. And he was out here. I live in LA, and we went to an event together. And he was saying to me, you should do this. You should do like the Daily Stoic because you have so much content, But then, and I said, well, that's a pretty good idea. And then I sort of realized that the 365-day format was a great way to sort of help somebody through a long project, like a year-long project or a 2-year-long, like a novel or a screenplay or something like that, where they had to face their demons every day. And so the point of this book was that you could kind of put it beside your laptop and open it, one day at a time. And it's kind of structured so that the start of the book is about the start of a project and the crap that's going to go through your mind driving you crazy at the beginning. And then the middle is about kind of act 2 horrors. And the end of it is about those moments when you get to the end of a project, when you you start to panic, like, oh my God, I'm going to actually have to release this and people are going to actually respond to it. So the 365-day format kind of lent itself to that.
Yeah. It's almost like a therapy for a writer.
Yeah, I hope so.
Yeah, I think it's amazing. And also, if you guys haven't, definitely check out War of Art, which is like kind of the book that, like, I found you through War of Art, which I think every creative should read, pretty much. Okay, so let's get started. So I wanted to kind of hear like your I want to start with like your upbringing, and all the way up to like your, I guess, when you started working, and kind of if there's any key stories there in your upbringing that you think was like a life lesson that you learned that you still look back and be like, wow, that's like a key lesson that I learned or something like that.
It's a great start. I really don't think there was anything in my upbringing that kicked me on to being a writer or anything like that. I think the certain traumas that happened to me after I started working and after I entered the adult world. But I grew up in a kind of a middle class upbringing. In fact, I grew up in Pleasantville, New York, which is a commuter city in Westchester County. My dad used to ride the train into New York City where he worked. And if anything, my upbringing was, if there was one word that kind of would encapsulate, it was sheltered, where I really felt like I didn't have any real exposure to the real world. I was really innocent, It was, a kind of I don't know what you would call it, a Dobie Gillis type of upbringing, So it really wasn't until I actually got out into the real world and the real shit started hitting the fan that anything like individuation started to happen to me.
So do you think that's like, because before you use the word trauma, do you think like a trauma is kind of necessary for artists?
Yes.
Like,
yes.
Why is that, do you think?
Because I think almost anybody that you or I might admire in their life story, they'll have at least one moment where they hit rock bottom. one way or another. And it seems to me that you sort of need that to, um, what can I say? Find yourself in the real world, to face reality. And from that point, it's a moment, come to Jesus moment when you say to yourself, whatever I've been doing so far, it ain't working. What do I really believe? What do I really want? What is life really about? Let me cut the bullshit and get, otherwise I'm going to die, or worse. So I think you do need some kind of trauma. I know that things like psychotherapy, you the hope is that you won't have to have that moment when you
Yeah.
wake up in the gutter at 4 in the morning, with a bottle of Jack Daniels, lying beside you, but that you can kind of come to some insight. But and maybe that works for somebody, but for some people, but it certainly didn't work for me, and it didn't work for most of the people that I know. I do think trauma is important, because we
So you've
grow up,
tried therapy, and
most of us grow up in a bubble of some kind. It
yeah.
may be a religious bubble, it may be a political bubble, it may be a social, ethnic bubble, but at some point that bubble bursts, and that's a trauma.
uh, yeah, that's probably the biggest trauma that you're gonna have when the bubble bursts.
Yeah.
So do okay, so kind of going back, so you've had like a kind of a sheltered life. You feel like you didn't have any huge conflicts up until that moment, and then did something happen that changed that, or
Yeah. Okay. Since we're
so you
okay.
how did you all get into writing? By the way.
Okay. That's a good answer because that's exactly the, the trauma we're talking about.
Oh,
Um, my first job was in advertising. I was like a junior copywriter at Benton and Bowles in New York City, and I had just gotten married. I was a
I didn't
young
know that.
guy, and I had a boss named Ed Hannibal, and he wrote a novel, and the novel was a success. And like overnight, he became like uh, a hero. He quit his job and went off to write. So I'm 22 years old or something, and I said to myself, well, why don't I do that?
Mm,
So where I'd never really thought about writing it at all. So this is where the trauma comes in. So I spent the next 2 years trying to write a novel, supported by my young wife, living in New York City, and I had no business at all doing that. I was not prepared mentally, emotionally, no clue what writing was about, and certainly no clue about the mindset that you needed to have and the mental toughness that you needed to have. So when it came down to the very end, like the 1 yard line when I was about to finish it, I choked. I just couldn't, I just panicked and I blew up the book and I kind of blew up my marriage at the same time. And that was sort of the trauma. So what I wound up doing, my wife and I wound up moving to San Francisco. This was back in the days of the hippie revolution, the counterculture, and that completely blew everything apart. And I wound up sort of on the road. Like we split up the money that we had. I gave her $60 and I had $60. I gave her whatever furniture we had and our mattress, and I had a van, a Chevy van, and I sort of hit the road, not knowing where the hell I was going, and overcome by a total sense of shame and failure that I had failed as a husband, as a provider, as a man, and certainly as a writer. And then I felt like I had no idea where I was going or what I was going to do. So that was sort of
mm,
the way I became where writing sort of first. Oh, let me say one thing more, son. So my feeling about writing at this time was that I had made a terrible mistake in even trying to do it, that I had no business doing it, and that it had sort of exacted a vengeance on me for being so naive and for being so arrogant and being such an idiot. And so the last thing in the world I ever wanted to do again was to face any kind of a piece of paper in a
mm.
typewriter or anything like that.
Wow. So it sounds like the first kind of so you take a huge swing and then it was like a huge miss. It was
Yes.
like right up because usually people will like work their way towards.
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
taking a huge swing.
Yeah.
But you had like you actually I admire that you had no fear to
I was
just go
just
all in on
dumb.
this.
That's all, But also, I'd seen my
I
boss. He never wrote a novel before. So I thought, well, he
That's
did it.
true.
Why can't I do it?
Uh, that's true.
Yeah.
Well, can I ask you, like, looking back, what do you think happened? Like, what was the difference? Like,
Between me and my
what?
boss.
Yeah, that one, and then also looking back, because now I'm sure looking back, it's like, oh, that's why it didn't work, or that's why I couldn't finish it, or like, what happened? Do you think?
Well, as you know from reading The War of Art, there's a
Uh,
concept in The War of Art of what I call resistance with a capital R, which is that force of self-sabotage that we all face as writers or artists, right? Which takes the form of procrastination, distraction, self-destruction, et cetera, et cetera. And I, at that time, had no clue that such a force existed, but it was beating the crap out of me and I didn't know it. And so one of the aspects of resistance with a capital R is it's really hard to finish something. And a lot of people, that was my bugbear forever. And it's for a lot of people too, because you get to the end of something and all of a sudden you're faced with the reality of people are going to judge it. Now it's out in the real world. So in any event, what really clobbered me was this demon, this dragon called resistance that everybody faces, but I had never heard of, had no clue it existed. And it just sort of blindsided me. And at the end, when I was about to finish this book, which was no good anyway, it was just a first try at something. Um, it made me freak out and, cheat on my wife and blah, blah, blah. So that's what went wrong.
did you learn that like immediately after it happened, or like way later, kind of reflecting back on
Way
it?
later. No clue then at
Okay,
all. Way later,
okay.
10 years later, 7 years later, something like that.
Oh wow. Okay. So can we continue from there? And so you were like on the road
Okay.
in your
On the road in my
van.
van. And I sort of the way I describe it is I kind of fell out of the bottom of the middle class. Like, if you have a college education, you look like you came from a good family. Usually, you can go into some kind of white collar situation, apply for a job, and they'll hire you because they look, more or less, right? You look like that kind of person. But for whatever trauma that had happened to me through this book, failing with this book, I just had this stink of failure on me so much that I could tell. I went into a few interviews and people would just see it on me right away. And they just said, we can't hire this guy. And so that became really obvious to me really fast. And I sort of wound up realizing, meanwhile, I had no kind of training like in blue collar field. Like I couldn't say become a car mechanic or something like that. I didn't have any kind of skill in that way, or a
Mm.
carpenter or something like that. So I wound up for a bunch of years, like 4 or 5 years, working jobs that all you had to do to get the job was have a pulse, like uh, substitute teaching. I worked as an orderly in a mental institution. I worked in the oil fields in Louisiana. At one point, I went to truck driving school and I drove trucks for about a year. That was the one skill that I sort of learned by going to a school. But basically, I was in a kind of a blue collar world. And also, for whatever reason, I was in the South. I grew up in the North, like a suburban New York kid. And for whatever reason, I gravitated to the South. And probably because it was so alien to anything that I knew, that nobody I knew, none of my friends had ever been there. Nobody in my family had any history there. And I think whether I realized it or not, I wanted to sort of have a history that was mine alone. So in any event, I
Mm.
spent a bunch of years and I always carried my typewriter with me in the back of my van, but I never touched it, not even to write a letter. Um, so that was kind of the next phase for me. I was basically running away from writing. That was definitely what it was. And then the overriding emotion that was with me was shame. I fell out of touch with my family. I didn't talk to my parents, my brother, uh, none of my friends. I was just kind of orbiting, on my own, lost and struggling.
So did
I'll
you
keep
have
going.
a
I'll keep going because I think I know
yeah,
what.
yeah.
Uh, so what finally sort of turned that around for me was I wound up back in New York at one point. I was driving a cab and working as a bartender and living in a $150 a month sublet thing. And I still had my typewriter, which I had not touched in all that time. And I had one night. This was sort of a breakthrough moment for me, where I'm sitting alone in my apartment and I'm thinking, I got to go out and distract myself. I got to get drunk. I got to chase women. I got to do something like that. And I thought to myself, I just can't do that one more fucking night. I can't do that again. So for whatever reason, I dragged out my typewriter and I rolled a piece of paper into it, and I had no idea what I wanted to write or what anything that would come out. I just thought it would be just something really, because I had no plan, I had no book, no idea, no nothing. But I sat down for about, this is in the War of Art. I'm sure you've read this story.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And I spent about 2 hours, just typing something. And when it was all done, I just threw it away. It was terrible. And I went back into the kitchen. There were some dishes sitting in the sink. And I started washing the dishes. And I realized that I was whistling. And what that meant to me was that this 2 hour session of writing, even though I hadn't produced shit, and I knew I would not for another 30 years or whatever, it grounded me. I felt okay. I finally could sit down at a typewriter, and it actually worked for me. I sat down crazy and I got up sane. And so that was sort of a real turning point for me where I said,
Mm,
okay, this is what I'm now going to do, going
mm.
forward. I'm going to be a writer.
Wow. What do you think has what do you think that shift was? Like what's changed inside you?
I think it
That
was, it's sort of like you hit bottom, right? We were just talking about that, right?
mhm.
That was for me the bottom when I thought, I can't go out one more night getting drunk, just, chasing women, whatever you're going to do, right? Distracting myself, fucking
Mm,
around. I thought, I
mm,
got to, my calling, whether I realize it or not, I've been running from it from years, is to sit down at the page and try to write a story, try to
mm,
write something. So, I finally, for 2 hours at least, faced that, you know, and it worked. The goddess, or however you want to look at it, kind of smiled on me and said, "Okay, you finally had the guts to do what you've been running from for all this time," and rewarded me
Did
with
you
a
have
good feeling.
like during that whole time did you have the desire to write
No,
or
I was just running from it completely. No,
uh,
it wasn't
yeah,
like I had any books in my mind. And even that evening
okay.
when I sat down, I had nothing in mind that I wanted to write. It was just sort of the act of doing it. Like
Mhm,
if I were a musician, maybe I would have sat down at the piano and just kind of played something. Or if I were a
yeah.
dancer, I might have danced around the room. But that's all it was.
Yeah, okay, got it. Yeah. Yeah, no, cuz like what you know, like I don't know why I didn't see this before, but while you're telling that whole story, like cuz like I went through a phase like that too, and I think when you in web design and I think for every creative there I don't know if you would agree with me, but I think there has to be this switch that happens where you go from creating for a result,
Mm,
for the outcome,
hmm
versus creating just for the sake of creating, like because that's what you just enjoy doing. And I think that shift has to happen. If you're only creating because I want to publish this book, or I want
Yeah,
to,
yeah,
put out this movie, or
I agree with you. It's
I
like
don't know, I don't,
Rick
yeah,
Rubin.
yeah,
That's his kind of philosophy, right? That the attachment to an outcome is the worst thing you can do if you're a creative person. But I will say in
mm,
this moment, I hadn't even thought about that. All I was doing
yeah,
was, like I say, picking up a guitar or sitting at the piano and just doing the for the love of, putting typing
yeah,
letters.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess maybe what you discover is that you have a true love of writing.
Yeah. So the next thing I would say
Right.
is like that was sort of one lesson for me. But the thing I would say also to anybody that's listening to this is, although that moment was like a real breakthrough for me, I didn't, I couldn't call myself a writer or that I was even any good for another 20 years. And it wasn't like another 25 years or something like that until I actually had something published. So,
Mm.
sometimes when you hear these stories, it's like there's that great moment and immediately everything's great, which is not in my experience at all. From that point
Yeah.
on, I had to really, grind it out and learn and work and keep going, keep going, keep finally before, finally
Yeah.
actually achieving anything.
Yeah. Yeah. Whenever I work with like entrepreneurs, I feel like a lot of brand stories, like they try to look for that aha moment,
Uh huh. Yeah.
like where like everything changed. But the thing is, like, I don't think we have like in life. Life doesn't work like that, right?
No.
It's usually like that little moment happened like multiple times,
Yeah.
and we just didn't notice it happening over and over.
Yeah.
And but then one day we see the pattern, we're like, wait a minute, like it's so it's kind of like that. I feel
I
like,
think so. There's this
yeah.
famous story about Walter Matthau, the actor, the guy from The Odd
Mhm.
Couple and stuff, where he was working with some young actor, and the young actor said to him, "I'm just looking for that one big break." And Walter Matthau started laughing. And he said, "Kid, it's not that one break, it's the 50 breaks." And I think that's exactly what you said. It's,
Oh wow,
you go another breakthrough and another one, a little one, a little one, a little one, a little one. And over time, finally something changes.
yeah, wow. That's so that analogy is so good. Even like I'm sure it was for you, right? Like when you publish your first like book that did great, like it's like, well, now you gotta keep doing it.
Yeah.
Like it's
Yeah.
not like,
Yeah.
and I feel like some people are like that on social media. Like once somebody goes viral, like they think once you go viral, that's it.
Yeah.
But actually, no. Like that disappears in like a
Yeah.
few days.
Yeah. Yeah, the
So
whole
yeah.
sort of social media world and the idea of kind of instant success is a real, really a trap, a mind trap for a lot of young people today because it just doesn't work like that. It's
Mm,
like Robert Greene says in his book Mastery that it's a really long process to learn anything, to become good at anything, and
mhm.
that's just reality.
So how did you go from there to actually to a point where you started calling yourself a writer?
Okay, the next phase of this thing was. Um, I wound up writing two more novels that never got published. They weren't any good, weren't worthy. And what would happen is I'd work in advertising or I'd work as a cab driver, work at something, save money. I'd usually work for like a year and a half or 2 years, save enough money to go to someplace cheap, rent a house, write a book. It didn't go anywhere. I did it again, um, and wrote another book. It didn't go anywhere. But there was one. Well, let me say one thing because this I think might help anybody that's listening. The first time I did this, because my the demon I was facing was I could never finish anything. Right, I had to get over that hump. So at one point I had saved. I'd worked in advertising in New York, and I saved $2,700, which I figured I could live for a year on. And I moved to this little town in Northern California, Carmel Valley, and I rented a house for $100 a month. And for 2 years, I worked on this novel. And this is also in the War of Art. And those 2 years were solid gold for me. I was basically alone. I didn't have a radio. I didn't have a TV. I had my cat, you know, and all I did, I wrote all day and I read in the evening. And I read all the books that, your writer is supposed to read, but that you never read when you're in college, Dostoevsky, Tolstoy, Flaubert, all that stuff. And of course, it all went in one ear and out the other, but at least I was reading it. And so I had those 2 years when I could just focus on my craft. It was sort of like Eric Clapton going into the bed to his mother's bedroom or whatever and playing the guitar for 2 years, right? And when he only for me, then I had to do it again for another 2 years. But when Eric Clapton finally came out, he could actually play the guitar. And for me, when I came out of this was like maybe a 7-year, 8-year period. I felt like I wasn't really a writer because I'd never sold anything, but at least I had finished 2 books. I actually had an agent, and so that was sort of the next phase for me of immersing myself in not only in the craft, not only in learning how to do it, but in learning how to keep going. When you hit those terrible moments when you want to throw in the towel and there's nobody around to help you, you're all alone, you have to face your demons alone, but that's a great learning process. So I really, at this point, I'm now like 40 years old or 42 years old or something. I at least could say to myself, well, I finished 2 books. They weren't any good, but I did finish them. So that was sort of the next phase of that story. And there's more to come, but that's
So
it.
is that when you? Yeah. So one of the things you talk about War of Art is like resistance is something like once you feel that resistance, once you notice it, like it's something you have to go after, right? Because that's a sign. The resistance is the sign that um, it's something that you have to pursue. But is that something that you? So like, how did you actually finish those books that time? Like, what was different that time? Like, what
Again,
made you?
that's a good question. Again, like say the emotion that was dominated my life was shame. I really felt like I had let my wife down. I'd let myself down, my family down. I've really and so as I was working on the first time I finished the book, I said I'm going to finish this motherfucker, or I'm going to kill myself. Um,
Mm,
Nothing is going to stop me because I couldn't stand it if I failed yet again. So no matter how hard it got, and it didn't get that hard because I was so driven to do it. And
mm-hmm,
I talk about that moment in the War of Art, where I was working
mm-hmm,
on a typewriter then, not a computer. And when you finish something, you have a pile of pages. You take that last page out of the typewriter, you put it at the bottom, and there you have it. You have this stack in front of you. And I go, I finally did finish something. So that was pure willpower and pure sort of um, just refusing to quit, because it would have been
yeah,
so devastating to me if I had failed yet again.
yeah. So it was almost like there, there's no other options.
Right.
It's like,
There's no plan B.
yeah,
That's it.
yeah. You've thrown all the other options out the
Yeah.
window. Like it must be done. And
Yeah.
I almost feel like I learned that lesson in my life a little bit differently because
Tell me.
I learned it the other way because I had no problem like launching a project. Um, but one of the things I noticed is that majority of the work, most brilliant stuff, got done in the last 2 weeks,
Mm.
like in a in like a 4 month project or
Uh-huh.
something like that, right? But then later on, when I got out on my own and I was working on my own projects where there was no deadlines, that's when I started learning this resistance thing, and it's around right around the time when I read the book War of Art.
Ah.
So it was actually a perfect timing,
Uh-huh.
because I feel like for me it was that freedom that made me realize, oh, there's something about deadlines that forced me to step up to that
Uh-huh.
last two
Yeah.
weeks.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like that if I force myself to finish, somehow I'll figure it out. But if I don't force myself to finish, like I can literally work on a project
Ah.
forever.
Yeah. That's exactly. It's resistance with a capital R at the finish line.
Yeah,
It's always hard. Yeah.
yeah.
Uh,
Um, so you went in the cabin, in California. You you wrote, and then when did you get your like first book published? And also like actually, I wanted to ask you because before you were, I keep forgetting like there's like interesting moments. I'm trying to go back, but you said something about you read all the novels and stuff like that later in life, like this
yeah.
because like most of the writers that I talk to, they like loved reading those stuff, and reading those novels is kind of what led them to wanting to be a writer, right? So you didn't like grow up wanting to be a writer.
No, I didn't. No, not at
So
all.
yeah. So it was literally that one, you saw somebody wrote a book, you're like,
Yeah.
oh, I think I can.
Yeah. I really got into it for all the wrong reasons, like what you were talking
Mhm,
about,
mhm.
thinking, "Oh shit, I'll be famous." My boss
Yeah,
did it. Why can't I do it? And
yeah.
then thinking, "Oh
So when you
man,
went through that process of like reading Dostoevsky and all that, like, and reading and writing and just like really getting into the arts of it, like,
yeah."
what was that experience like?
I mean, it was
Like,
great.
did you fall?
It was great. I
Did you
loved
learn
it. I
something
was
new
ready
about?
for it at that time. I wish I could say that I got a lot out of it. I wish I could say, I was reading Crime and Punishment and I learned how, this what Skolnikov did, blah, blah, blah. But I didn't. I really was just
Mm-hmm.
imbibing it all, just marinating in it. Um, but somehow it really, really helped. I really felt
I
like
think it's important though. Like when I first started my agency, I was like, oh, like when you go to an agency and they have this vibe and they have this culture and all
uh-huh.
of that, I'm like, that's stupid. That all of that is like, I used to do that. Like if you just know how to code or you do a good job, that's good enough. But more and more, what I'm starting to realize is that actually that environment is so important. Like the fact that like when people come to work at my agency and when they come in the door they feel like excited and obsessed about
Uh-huh.
you know designing, coding, whatever it
Uh-huh.
is, I think it's important. And I think that's kind of like when you went through that phase of like just really like falling in love with the craft rather than
Yeah.
uh, yeah,
Yeah. And actually, I'll go when I talk about the next phase because there's another
yeah,
phase,
yeah,
another.
yeah,
I'll talk about that too.
yeah, let's go there. Yeah.
So the next phase was, so I think I'm like 42 years old now. I finished the second novel where it saved all. I'm in New York now, driving a cab. Uh, I finished the second book that I also couldn't sell. So I've worked like 2 years to save money, wrote for another 2 years, and that was like another all is lost moment, low point of my life, where I really thought, should I hang myself or should I shoot myself? Which one? And because I said, I can't do this again. I've done this 3 times now. I just haven't got it in me to do another 4 years of something to fail again. And for like 3 or 4 days, I was in a really terrible place. And then I had a kind of a breakthrough. I thought, why don't I go to Hollywood? Why don't I become a screenwriter? I said, I've failed as a novelist. Let me go out to LA and I'll fail as a screenwriter. And because from working in advertising, as you know, you do commercials. So I know what a camera is, I know what a storyboard is, I know what a script is. So that kind of gave me hope. I still had my Chevy van, I had my cat. I packed my cat and my all stuff in my van, and I had like $1,000, and I went out to LA, and that became sort of the next phase of learning. That went on for like I don't know 7 or 8, 9 years or something like that. And what happened was, um, I don't know how much I want to abbreviate this for the sake of boredom, but I for like about 3 years, I couldn't sell anything. I was working in another little agency. I wrote like 9 screenplays on spec. Each one took like 6 months, couldn't sell any of them. And one day, my agent took me out to lunch and he said, because he was getting tired of taking my shit out and getting nothing back, he said, what if I were to team you up with an older, established writer and you would be like his, junior partner? And he said, you'll have to work your ass off, but the writer I'm thinking about is a known brand. He's working, he'll bring in the jobs, you'll start making money. So he did team me up with a guy named Ron Shusett, who did the first Alien and also did Total Recall. So he was a real brand, a guy that, got you jobs. So that became, for me, that went on for like another 5 years or so, a great apprenticeship for me. Because I was immersed in Hollywood what a screenplay is, what a story is, the way movies are made, act one, act two, act three, all that stuff. And I kind of learned what a story was. So really for the first time, I was learning like you when you're in the business, of advertising, marketing and stuff, you learn, right? And so let me continue for
Were you
one
like
thing.
shadowing him?
Hmm?
Like, were you working with him like every day on a daily basis, or was it
Yeah,
like,
every day we would work together every day,
oh, okay.
and we did a bunch of stuff. We did a lot of scripts, like 30 when all was said and done. Not everyone got made; only very few got made. Anyway,
Mhm.
and I won't tell you what any of them are because they're all terrible. Um, but I did learn. Then there came a moment when I started to uh, actually get reasonably good and have some faith in myself. And there was one project that my partner and I did together where I did like 90% of it. So I said to him, I want full credit on this one. I demanded credit. And basically, he fired me. He said, if that's the way you feel about it, I can no longer work with you. And that's the end. And he never talked to me again. And so then it was sort of like what you were talking about before, son, about, how you were great when there was a deadline and all of a sudden you were on your own. It was like I had this absolute moment of panic where I said, what am I going to do now? I'm on my own. My partner got the jobs. I can't get the jobs. Nobody knows who I am. I'm just this kid writer, even though I'm 45 years older, almost 50 or something. Uh, but I said to myself, am I going into too much detail on this stuff or is this
No,
okay?
no, 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 no. This is super interesting.
So I said to myself, I've got enough money saved to last a year. And in a year, I can write 2 screenplays. So I said, all right, let me write 2. And if I can't sell them, I'll go back to the oil fields or something. But as it turned out, I did sell them both. They both were made as movies. They're both terrible movies. I will never tell you what they are, unwatchable. But at that point, I thought, okay, I've finally done it on my own you know, without somebody guiding me or without
Mm,
somebody like so it's another sort of step in the evolution of a writer. I now felt like, I can take a story from inception to
mm,
completion and actually sell the motherfucker.
yeah.
So now I feel like,
That's such a wow. That's such a profound moment, actually, because I feel like everyone needs that one moment
yeah,
to go, oh, I can do this.
yeah. And
Do you know
they
what
say
I mean?
sometimes that you should say to
Yeah,
yourself, like, if you're struggling, say to yourself, I'm a writer, or whatever. I'm an artist, I'm a
yeah,
dancer, I'm a whatever it is. But in the
yeah,
real world, you do have to actually have enough success that you can objectively say that and not just bullshit
mhm,
yourself or do
yeah,
like
yeah,
an affirmation. At some
yeah,
point you say to yourself, I've
yeah,
actually made money here. I'm driving a
yeah,
car. I got
yeah,
paid, that kind of
yeah,
thing.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, like that, because that's the exact same feeling I had when I sold my first website. When somebody first hired me
Yeah. It's
and
amazing
paid
when
me
somebody gives
money,
you a check, right?
yeah, yeah, it's like whoa, like maybe I'm pretty good at
Yeah.
this. You know what I mean? Like something like that. And I also think it's like relevant when you're, with writing. It's not like there's a clear right or wrong answer, but in coding, when you're coding, like obviously it either works or it doesn't work,
Uh-huh.
right? So usually, like most programmers have to have that first eureka moment of something that they're working
Ah,
on.
yeah.
Oh, that worked.
Yeah.
And without that, like people, like usually if they don't have that in like the first few weeks, I feel like a lot of them don't last.
Yeah.
They
Yeah.
just give up. They're usually like, oh, I can't do this.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like
So
you build an airplane and it flies. You go, wow, look at
yeah,
it, it's flying.
yeah.
Yeah,
It's like, oh, I could actually
nobody
do
can
this. Yeah,
argue with that. Yeah.
yeah. That's awesome. Okay,
So I'll
that's when you were
continue
like,
if you want me
yeah,
to, son. I'll continue because there's
yeah,
another
yeah, yeah.
phase after
Please, yeah.
this.
Okay.
So I now have I've been working for maybe 10 years as a screenwriter, and no big success or anything like that. But at least I've made enough money, and it's to survive, right? But I've never written a novel. I have not, I'm all failure on that kind of thing. So at some point, this idea,
So were you? So were you known? I guess you were considering yourself a screenwriter
Yeah,
at
I
that
was
time,
like a
maybe.
B-list screenwriter, you know, not an
Okay,
A-list screenwriter, but
but you still wanted to write
yeah,
books.
yeah.
Okay.
So, because from that was what I started at, right? So, I'm a big believer, as I'm sure you know, in the muse, in inspiration, in the goddess, right? And somehow the idea for the book that became The Legend of Bagger Vance and became that movie um, just came into my head. But it came into my head as a book, not as a movie.
Mhm.
So I had a meeting with my agent, my movie agent. And I told him, I got good news and I got bad news. When the bad news is, the good news is I've had an idea that I love. The bad news is it's a book, not a movie. And basically, he fired me. And he kind of said, and he was right. He said, I've been busting my ass for you for the last 7 years to get your name out there in this town. And now you're telling me you're going to go away for a year or a year and a half? People
Mhm.
forget you in this town in a week. All my work is going to go down the drain. So, but I said, hey, I can't help myself. I want to do this. I'm going to do it. So that became the first thing I ever did that actually got published as a book. And at that point, my career, quote unquote, turned a corner. And now I was a book writer, not a movie writer.
Nice. Wait, did you not think that that could be turned into a screenplay?
Uh, it just came to me as a book, you know, and
Mm,
that was all. If somebody
yeah.
said to me, well, try writing it as a screenplay, I'd say, no, I can't. It's got to be a book. And I think it did have
Okay.
to be a book.
Yeah. No, no, I understand.
Yeah.
Yeah, like I can understand why some things just
Yeah.
like imagine trying to like make a movie out of Crime and Punishment or something like that.
I guess they did it, but
Like, yeah, I guess so. Yeah. Okay, so that's when you kind of went back. By the way, I also wanted to ask you. So with the because I think there's something really important about how you work for 5 years with another right like a mentor
yeah.
almost. And I see so because like I always tell people like if you want to be a writer, find the writer you admire and go work for them for free for a year. Or like I always tell them that because you can because people always like these mentors always give me advice, right? Like these things like here and there nuggets. But then none of that compares to me sitting with them for a week and seeing what they do on a day-to-day basis, like moment to moment, how they talk on the phone, how they manage their schedule, like all those tiny little things, how they deal with agents, how they deal with managers, like all of those are so important things that you learn through osmosis. I feel
Yeah.
like
So true.
so.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm sure that's so it that time you probably like really ramped up and to a point where you said you wrote most of the script by yourself
Yeah. This one particular one.
and
Yeah. Yeah.
he fired you. Looking back, do you feel like he did the right thing, or are you like
Yeah,
still
absolutely. I did
bitter
the right
about that?
thing. It's time, certain, you mean when I was asking for credit and my partner
Yeah,
fired me? Yeah, I
yeah,
definitely did the right thing. But, you start off in a situation like that where you really are an apprentice. You really are, you don't know diddly, and you learn and you
hmm
learn. But at some point, as you evolve, you go, well, I have ideas of my own. I can,
yeah,
I have my own voice. Let me try it. You're
yeah,
like a fledgling bird where you say, let me try my wings and see
yeah.
if I can fly. And there usually does come a moment like that. And usually the
That's
master
true.
kicks you out of the nest.
Yeah, yeah. No, I think that's important. Like, I I think there comes a point where, because like if you're creative, right, like struggling to kind of start in the beginning, like let's say you're a new designer or writer or whatever it is, yeah, the world is not going to be fair to you.
Yeah.
Like it's going to be extremely unfair to you, and like what happened to you is unfair, but that's actually what happens to people who start out, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
But then as you grow your career, it'll be unfair to you the other
Yeah.
way,
Right.
like to the other way,
Yeah.
right? So that like now I feel like I get credit and things like that that I don't
Yeah.
deserve sometimes.
Yeah. Yeah. But you're
So
certainly right that it's watching watching the master talk on the phone, or how he deals with a problem or something. Like one of the things that when I would work with Ron was we would have a problem, and I would come up with like 10 solutions. I'm sure you can relate to this, son,
Mm-hmm.
completely. I'd come
Mm-hmm.
up with 10 ideas, and he would reject 9 of them, and the one he would pick would be the right one. And each time I would say, how did he know? How did he know that was what? Because I couldn't tell. I thought they were all good or all bad. And so when you watch that happen for 1,000 times, I think you begin to sort of learn, oh, that's what the good one is, you know? But
Yeah.
how can you, nobody can teach you that, you know? You
Yeah.
can't
Yeah.
get that
Yeah.
out of a book or anything.
Yeah. It's like kind of you just sense it over time. Yeah. It's like,
Yeah.
yeah, I love that. That's so true.
Yeah. I can
Okay, so you
remember,
publish.
I can remember in advertising, in my early days as a young advertising cub, we used to have these things. Uh, this was at Ted Bates, which you can relate to that, where we would be pitching, the agency would be pitching a new business, right? Burger King or something like that,
Mm-hmm.
right? And every creative group would come up with, the campaign and the commercials and da 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 da. And then we would have these giant meetings that they used to call gangbangs, where it would be like, 40 creative teams in a room with the creative director, and each person would put their storyboards up on the wall, and they would make their pitch. And then the creative director and other smart people would evaluate them, and they'd say, oh, that's shit, and this is why it's bad, because it doesn't do this, this, this. And then something good would come up, and they go, this is really good, and here's why. And so that was like an invaluable education as you're watching it. You go,
Mm-hmm.
because you sort of say, do I like, is this one good? And if so, why, in your head? And then the master tells you, oh, this is good, and here's why. And it's a great learning thing. And that's really what I got from working with my partner, Ron.
Yeah. Oh yeah, I love that. Those critique sessions are so helpful.
Yeah.
By the way, before we move on to the next phase of your stories, did you? So you worked in advertising, and you also wrote like a book. So one of the questions that I get a lot is like the storytelling in terms of like, let's say like a fiction, right? Like for art
Mm-hmm.
versus storytelling for marketing, right? Like,
Yeah.
do you feel like there's a difference?
You know, I,
And if so, like, why
actually,
do you
I
think
would
this?
like to ask you about this, because I've never quite understood what storytelling as marketing is. And I
Oh,
guess
okay,
you could
yeah,
say Nike kind of had their story that they tell, and Apple and da 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 da. But uh, I've never quite understood that. In fact, I will ask you right now: what is
yeah. So
storytelling for
for
marketing?
so like in the copywriting world, what we would say, or even like in the sales world, like sales and marketing world, we would say um, the customer has some sort of a pain. Like, so this is kind of the final result that I came to. Like for me, when I teach my students, like the marketing way of storytelling, I first tell them here's the main difference. If you go to like if Dostoevsky was alive and I ask him, "Oh, what's Crime and Punishment about?" He's gonna say, "I don't know." Like he's like, do you know what I mean? Like a lot of artists, what they say when they, how did you get the idea for this, or how did you write? Like they just say it came out of me. Like and like kind of the Rick Rubin whole philosophy, right? Like I think that's art. Art is something that comes out of you, whether you're writing
Uh-huh.
it or drawing it, singing it, or whatever music, writing the music, and you can't really explain why. Like kind of like when they asked Phil Collins like uh in the air tonight, like what was that about? Like about the guy killing like or watching somebody drown, and he's like, I don't know. He said, I don't know what it said. It just came out of me after like I went through my divorce with my wife. And I think that's kind of how art is. And I think sometimes, like Rick Rubin said this, like sometimes you don't realize until 20 years later, looking back, it's like, oh, that's what it was
Uh-huh.
about.
Yeah.
Like I didn't know at the like, and
Yeah.
that's kind of how that process is. And I think that's the beauty of art. That's why I think when you read like a fiction, like a fiction story or something, when I read a good story, like in the you can kind of see the dark side of the hero, and you can kind of see some respectable side of the villain, and it's not very a clear line between who the hero is to who the villain is. Like it's You know,
Uh-huh.
it's all the messiness of the humanity, right? But then in marketing, when you do storytelling for marketing, or like it's basically propaganda, right? It's not. It's the hero is clearly the hero. Everything about him is good. The villain is everything about him is it's very like
Uh-huh.
forced, right?
Uh-huh.
And I think the reason why is because in marketing, what I have to do is I need an agenda. I want to sell you this idea
Uh-huh.
or this product or whatever it is. And the thing is, there's some belief that you have, some myth that you believe, which is stopping you from buying this product. So what I need to do is I need to tell you a story that's going to debunk that myth,
Uh-huh.
so that and the way I would do it is either I would tell my own story of when I used to believe that myth.
Uh-huh.
Hey, I used to believe that, oh yeah, if I just take a year off and write a book and boom, publish it, it's gonna be good, right? Like that. I have a good idea. I'm a good writer, so I think I can do it. Well, what I didn't realize is that it's gonna be so hard to finish the book because of this resistance,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's a myth that I used to believe that I
Uh-huh.
learned, right? And now I'm teaching it to you,
Uh-huh.
and that's kind of like the same process selling. If
Uh-huh.
the reason why somebody's not buying from you is because they believe in some myth that's
Ah,
stopping them from buying. So
ah,
so that's kind of how I reverse engineered the story. But then it's really different because now there's an agenda, there's a goal,
uh-huh.
and I'm just fake reverse engineering
Yeah,
the
yeah, yeah.
story to fit that goal. Whereas in the art of storytelling, I think there is really no goal. The goal is to see what comes out. Really,
Ah.
I feel like.
Let me ask you, how would you define propaganda?
I mean, I guess like to me, I would consider marketing and propaganda the
Uh-huh.
same thing. Like so, it's like art, like using art to with an agenda, with a
Uh-huh.
goal in mind. Because like I in my opinion, art should have no agenda, right? It should it's an expression of an artist, and then us as an audience
Uh-huh.
connecting something with that art, right?
Uh-huh.
And some people will connect more, some people will less. Some people will connect with these kind of people, some people will connect with these kind of people. But propaganda to me is like it has a purpose, and it's design. Like it's like the difference between, for me, it's like a painting, like art, and design. Like if I design a
Uh-huh.
bathroom sign, like I need to know like which one's the men's room versus which the woman. Like just by looking at the design, I should be able to tell, and it has a purpose, right?
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Ah. It's really interesting because we certainly get a lot of propaganda these days coming in from
Yeah.
all sides, from the news,
Yeah.
social media, from everywhere.
But don't you feel like you can kind of feel the difference though? Like when you
Yes.
see a propaganda versus like a art,
Yeah,
like a
definitely.
real truth,
Definitely.
you can kind of
Yeah.
sense that okay, there's something phony about
Yeah,
this,
yeah.
or
You can
there's
feel
something
the
fake
lie
about this.
underneath
Yeah,
it. Yeah, yeah.
yeah. So weird. Okay, sorry, like we got sidetracked, but let's kind of get back
No,
on.
that's so good. That's really interesting stuff.
So after your first novel, uh, what happened next? Was it like all uphill or downhill from there? Was it all
In a way, it was.
smooth sailing
And
from
I think it really was because um, at that point, well, thinking about the movies that I had written, a lot of them I liked, and I thought that they were good work, but they weren't really coming from that place in me that was really authentic. And then once I started writing books, for whatever reason, that really turned the corner for me. And I really felt that like almost everything I've done since then is really coming from that deep place. Um, and a lot of times it surprises me. I don't even know where it came from, like you were talking about before. Um, so it did become a different world. One of the books I've written is called The Artist's Journey. I don't know if are you
Hmm.
familiar with that,
Yeah.
son?
Yeah, yeah. I haven't read that one, but
Well, I'll give you the
I
nutshell
know about
version
it.
of it. The
Okay.
nutshell version is that our life is divided into two parts: our hero's journey and our artist's journey. And the hero's journey comes first. And that's when you're searching for your calling. What was I put on this planet to do? And when you finally find it, then life becomes very simple and very boring in a sense. Like for me, now I'm a writer, and it's really my life is about what's next, what am I going to do next, and shaping the material part of my life, finances and time and stuff like that, so that I can do my work. Now my life is just about doing the work. I'm not out
Mhm.
partying. I'm not out chasing any dreams. I'm just trying to do the work, and that becomes your artist journey, I think. And
Mhm.
that's
I agree.
that's what I that's so it's been pretty
I
boring from then on.
this is also reason why I wish like people would come and just watch me work for like a week, because they would realize how boring my job is. Like I just feel like that on if you're not at a point where you're doing boring shit every day, you're not really like doing something, because like you really have to do something so long and so consistently to a point where it literally the task itself has to be boring,
Yeah.
right? Maybe the
Now,
stuff that
but
you
the
comes out of
difference
it might not.
is it may be boring from the outside. If I'm watching you sitting at your desk or your computer or wherever it is, that might look boring to me, like as opposed to you climbing Mount Everest or jumping out of an
Mhm.
airplane. But inside your head, it's not boring. Like right now, I'm working on a new piece of fiction. And if you saw me, it looks I'm just sitting at the keyboard. But in my head, I'm working, wrestling with all kinds of, I'm trying to solve this Rubik's Cube in my head,
Yeah.
and it is exciting. At
Uh,
least
uh,
it just can't be communicated, until
uh,
it's finally done and you say, "Hey, I baked the cake. Here it is."
uh. And I guess that's kind of why we all do like as a creative, we all know that feeling, right? Like of the thing that's like boring to other people, but to us, it's like,
Yeah,
you know,
yeah,
time flies. Like,
yeah.
yeah, yeah. I actually I agree with you. I do think that when I look at most of my clients, uh, and most just people that are at a certain level of success, they've all had this one moment in their career, like the point of no return. It's like, okay, from this point on, it's gonna be smooth sailing
Yeah,
from here.
yeah.
Do you know
Which
what I mean?
doesn't
So
mean
I
it's
guess
smooth
that,
sailing in your life, but it's
yeah, yeah,
or
yeah,
even in your career. But at least you
yeah,
don't have any doubt anymore about who you
yeah,
are and why you're here. You know, you can say, I'm an athlete or I'm a dancer or and
oh
that's what
yeah,
I'm here.
okay,
It's what I'm trying to do.
got it, yeah,
And I also feel
yeah,
like, because I definitely believe in another dimension of reality and, the goddess. And I also believe that you're now aligned with heaven, you know, that the mysterious forces of the universe, and I know Rick Rubin would agree with this, are on
mm,
your side, and
mm,
your job is just to tune into them, to tune into the cosmic radio station and
yeah,
do what the station tells you
without
to do.
yeah, yeah, without the fear, without the fear, just like see what comes up,
Yeah,
see what comes from it,
yeah.
and I think that's kind of like that's all actually that's kind of been my weakness. I have a very analytical brain,
Uh-huh.
and I really overthink. And what happens is like when you go to like somewhere and people are like loosen up, dance or whatever, and just let yourself be, right? Like I can't do that. I'm like very stiff, and I'm like very self conscious of like every move and things like that. I can't just let myself go. But
Yeah,
I felt like as an artist, you kind of have to do.
yeah,
You really
yeah,
have to let
yeah.
go.
It's like
And I
I agree with you completely. I'm the same guy. And I think that for me, what's fun for me is not fun for other people. And what's fun for other people is not fun for me. I have no interest in 99% of the things that people do that are supposed to be fun. If you gave me a
mm,
Ferrari, I wouldn't know what to do and I wouldn't want to know what to do with it.
mm,
Um,
mm.
so, yeah, well, that's
I guess that's part of the knowing yourself thing.
I guess,
Like,
yeah. You just
yeah,
realize, why should I
uh,
fight this and keep trying to do
uh,
what the society thinks you should do? Fuck that.
yeah,
I am who
yeah,
I am and I can only do that.
yeah. Okay, so kind of is there more to the from there
No, that's
to
it. That's the end of
uh,
the story. I'm just
no,
working on,
I feel like it's super interesting. Like I can clearly see. all of the key lessons that you've kind of like discovered throughout your life. And I also love the what you said about the artist journey. Like you have to go through the hero's journey first. It's gonna be a
Yeah.
hot mess,
Yeah.
and then the artist journey is gonna be. It should be kind of boring, but I also love how I feel like a lot of people try to skip the hero's journey part and go straight to the artist journey. Like
Yeah.
a lot of young writers or young creators,
Yeah.
and
And
I,
some
I
people
think they should
succeed.
have.
You know, I'm always
Yeah,
amazed at people that sort of find their calling young. It's like, God bless them. You know,
yeah.
I was like
I think it's
3
because
years old or something.
I think those are the kids that are going through the hero's journey simultaneously while they're going through
Yeah.
the writer's journey.
Yeah.
um, so to kind of wrap it up, like if you were to kind of look at the world today and people today, like what do you think is like the most common myth that people believe in that you would like to like, hey, hey, wake up,
I
like
think
you know what I
I
mean?
would go back to that Walter Matthau story that we talked about
Mhm.
at the start, where the young actor says, I just need that one break. And Walter
Mhm.
Matthau said, kid, it's not the one break, it's the 50 breaks. And I think the myth, I think today, spawned by social media and by Kim Kardashian, who did one
Mhm.
sex tape and became a superstar, is that you can go viral and that's it. And the answer, of course, is that you really can't. It's a really to master anything. I mean, if you were going to be a brain surgeon, you wouldn't expect to be able to do that in a week, right? Or be a
Mhm.
concert pianist. You know, shit, I got to work a long time to do this. And
Yeah.
I think that's the reality. And that's not really taught to us in school, you know. I think, and it's certainly not taught to us by the culture. The culture keeps telling us overnight you can be a success, you know, and it's just not true. So
Yeah.
the other thing I would say, if I had to say anything to any young people today, I would say it's a long life, you know, take some pressure off yourself. You don't have to solve your life, you know, by the time you're 23. You know, it might take you like me till you're 53 before you feel
Mhm.
like you broke through to anything. So, you know, enjoy it along the way if you can.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. Yeah. I really love it, and I I do think everybody really needs that message right now, where you know, especially like with writers or creators or you know, people think that just because they know how to write emails that they can become a
Yeah.
writer like that it's going to be an easy thing, right?
Yeah.
Like, but like you said, it's a long journey because you know there's a lot of other
Yeah.
things that you need to learn
And it isn't just the
along the way.
craft that you're learning, whatever it is, ballet, you know, editing, coding. It isn't just the craft. It's the mindset that allows you to keep going when the various demons raise their ugly heads, which they always do.
Mm-hmm.
And again, I
I
want to
thought you were
thank you,
gonna say.
son. I love your stuff. I love you are authentic as fuck. And I love to listen to you. Anytime I see you when I'm going through my feed or whatever it is, I stop and watch the whole thing, and it's always great. And thank you for having me on the podcast.
Thank you so much for your time, Stephen. Yeah, it's always like I'm amazed when somebody I admire also like follows me. So thank you so much. Thank you for your time. Thank you for being here. Thank you for all your stories. I'll see everyone next week. I'll see you on the next episode. Cheers, y'all.
Okay, great.